I think that happens best when it's horizontal. I think that happens best in the horizontal because horizontal allows you to see each other. And when we watch some other struggles, we should be watching to see if people are going to give power to those who are being put forth as their leaders, or are they going to keep that power within themselves? You know, but that's on that level. Where we at now, Canada, United States. I'm in Providence, Rhode Island. You're right now in Toronto. It's like, what are the issues? What is my community? And many times, my community is several different communities. But how can we begin to connect in ways that helps us to feel hopeful, optimistic, and powerful? You know? So, as folks of color who have had to deal with this monster, we don't really have a choice but to figure out the best, healthiest ways we can begin to create those spaces of resistance, that we can create those kinds of communities of resistance that ain't trying to make us, we are the Michael Jackson, we are the world, or we are the children, as if we all just the same. No, our strength is actually in our diversity as well, because it also allows us to respect the history of different people's struggles. Because those histories mean that different kinds of struggles are going to proceed from those different communities, but that we can figure out ways to get us on the same page. So when Seattle happens, you know, where they go to shut down the what was that conference in Seattle? I think it was '99. What was, I heard it in the background. This good thing about
96 WTO.
the WTO. When you got something like that and you see that people are figuring out in a democratic way on the ground how to proceed to shut this WTO down that is inclusive of different peoples, you figure, well, we can do that. In New York, we experimented with the spokes councils, which was something different, you know, but it allowed us to have different voices in these strategy sessions to shut down the Republican convention. This was in I think 2000, you know, and so for me, that we were experimenting with different ways of organizing and strategy sessions and going into action that did not exclude people, you know, was very optimistic, and it made me feel very optimistic that we can't rely on old structures. We can't rely on what some founding father of Marxism, even anarchism, said 100, 200 years ago. We have to figure this out as we go. Your generation, I feel, is much smarter than my generation because you got access to a lot more learnings than we did when it comes to understanding the interconnections of all the different kinds of oppressions and the interconnection with different struggles. And when we talk about respect and dignity, your generation has a lot more going than we. I think the difference is this. I think that with what we understood, we were still willing to take risk. I think your generation has to figure out how to take more risk with what you know, and to be willing to see what works, to be able to see what needs to be tweaked. This is why I talk a lot of times about jazz and improvisation. Is like the struggle is a lot of jazz and improvisation. You got to kind of play with stuff to see what works, because what's key for us in terms of what works is how much community is created, how much horizontal empowering of relationships is happening from what we do, how much we can set in place that limits the ability of the opportunists and others to take over from what we create when power is actually exercised amongst us and we do have victories. And just a little thing about victories that I think is important. I'm through with the big victory. I think that was the old revolution, the big R revolution. It was going to be the big cataclysmic revolution and overthrow of the government. I think just like for me with the small revolution, the real revolution from the bottom are a lot of small victories. From the ways that we relate to each other to the times when we have to confront those physical structures of oppression and those robots of oppression who come to stop us. You know, a lot of small, thousands and thousands of small victories is what makes this happen. We need to be able to have them because people need to see that we can fight back and win. If it's a banner dropping somewhere, if it's that we got to block this intersection because there's a certain meeting happening, or there another police done killed another person in our community, whatever, people need to see that we can have victories. If it's to have a successful meeting, it's a victory. So I begin to look at it as when we can have these smaller victories, even if it doesn't have anything to do with the more militant aggressive stuff, the more we can break away from thinking that we're powerless, those structures of our oppression begin to fall. If it's like if this can be represented as a wall of bricks, that when we relate to each other differently in healthy ways, that the wall begins to crumble. A brick begins to loosen somewhere and it falls out. When we can have a meeting that becomes really inclusive, that we're mindful of some of the dynamics that we carry out that shut certain people down, you know, when men shut up, step back, allow women and others whose voices are usually silenced to step forward, the wall cracks begin to happen. A brick comes out, you know, or if it's like a million troops of the enemy happening and they're advancing on you, but the more that we can relate to each other in our social relationships and not just always thinking political, that those robotic troops begin to fall because we're reclaiming our power. Now that doesn't mean like if certain folks organize on like the Black Liberation Army level and others and they want to hit some of them armored cars and them banks that we're necessarily, you know, it happens. But power is with the people. Power must come from us. In our particular communities and in our diversity of communities, we have to figure out how to move it on a similar page that allows us to pull together all of our strengths so that we can put an end to, you know, this stuff that has gone on for too long. It's just too long. So the last thing that, you know, that I want to talk about is that, you know, I mean, I did some prison time. Total, I did 14 years. And when I look at it like that compared to how long Mumia Abu-Jamal has been in prison, or Leonard Peltier has been in prison, or some of the other Black Liberation Army prisoners of war, I haven't done anything. Because at this point, they've been in there for 30, 40 years. 30, 40 years, you know. And it's still hard to get a whole bunch of other movement organizations to put political prisoners on their agenda, you know? But you think, who did these political prisoners represent? If it's 30, 40 years ago, it's folks that was out in the streets organizing and fighting. The things that we're doing today are possible because they laid the groundwork for us, the things that we do today. Just that the generation before them laid the groundwork for them, and it was my generation, you know? We cannot move forward, I don't think, in a real way that is I want to use the word integrity, if we do not have political prisoners on our agenda, if not on the top of our agendas.